In Agawam today, 2 informational meetings were held discussing the proposed construction of a battery energy storage facility on Silver Street. Western Mass News reporter Addie Patterson joins us in studio after attending tonight's discussion. So, Addie, what did you learn?
Amanda, Boston-based company Long Road Energy hosted tonight's public information meeting in an effort to assure the public that if this facility were to be built on Silver Street, safety would be a priority.
The community is doing everything it can to ensure that the installation of these types of battery energy storage systems is done as safely as possible.
Dozens of residents in attendance for Monday's informational meeting in Agawam discussing the proposed battery energy storage system set to be located at 769 Silver Street. At this point, there are still several legal agreements and planning steps to complete before construction can get underway. However, if all goes according to plan, work should start next year.
Our intention is to build the safest, most technically advanced technology of the day.
We spoke with Long Road's Director of Development, Chad Allen. He tells us this proposed facility would be a safe addition in Agawam and would have serious benefits for the town.
It'll generate a lot of new tax revenue for the community. The community benefits plan that can be generated as a result of the project. Employment, so both during construction and operations. The electrical side, so it offers reliability, it offers affordability opportunities to reduce costs to Massachusetts ratepayers.
Battery energy storage systems have been a hot topic in Western Mass, with facilities being proposed in multiple other communities like Blandford, Westfield, and Southampton. People we've spoken with previously say they're worried about things like fires coming from these systems.
There is no safe place in Pioneer Valley to have one of these facilities.
Westfield City Councilor Dan Ally was at the forefront of opposing Westfield's BESS facility that was previously proposed by Jupiter Power. Ally says neighbors should be against having any BESS facilities in our area because potential issues like a fire would affect the entire region due to the valley's close elevation to sea level.
You're looking at a fire that's going to last 2 to 5 days. And the real danger in the Pioneer Valley is you'd have all that toxic pollution, toxic smoke and whatnot. But nothing clears out of the Pioneer Valley. So even after the fire was done burning, you'd have that poisonous gases remaining in the Pioneer Valley, the whole area. These plumes will go 35 or 50 miles days after the fire ends.
The Agawam Energy Center would take up 17 acres of land on Silver Street. Again, the project is still in its conceptual phase. However, the proper approval construction could begin next year with projections operations beginning in 2029. Reporting live in studio, Addie Patterson, Western Mass News.